Anti-AUKUS submarines. To the alliance, show defiance. No to AUKUS submarines.
Huge investment in offensive weaponry means that Australia is turning its face away from peace, instead focusing on the prospect of war.
China is not an invasion threat to Australia. Even the Defence Department says that. We want to make sure in Labor Against War, it speaks for the interests of the great majority of people against war. It's not just we've had more than 100 party units pass motions against AUKUS.
Rather than doubling down on this stupid deal, Australia should take this opportunity with the US-UK reviews to conduct the review and get ourselves out of this mess. Plans for Australia to host US B-52s at Tindal in the Northern Territory in a more permanent way, with construction underway now. It's a big deal. Half the fleet of these planes are nuclear capable, the other half are only conventionally capable, and this risks breaching the South Pacific Nuclear Free Zone Treaty, the Rarotonga Treaty that Australia is a party to, because it prohibits the stationing of nuclear.
Till now has been met with very little pushback from the public. That's what you meant by shuffling down the throat. Until now. Why? It is because our media has sufficiently primed the public to be anxious and fearful of a China threat. For 3 years in a row, my institute, which is Australian-China Relations Institute at UTS, has come up with polls that suggest that 4 in 10 Australians surveyed believe that the Chinese Australians can be mobilized by the Chinese Communist Party to act against Australian interest. Still, even last year, 4 in 10. So Labor has done much better at managing the rhetoric, right? As a result of that, they have to some extent won the approval of the Chinese Australian communities, which is why the Chinese communities in the last election, have voted overwhelmingly in support of Labor. But not because of AUKUS, but precisely in spite of AUKUS. Because I have data to show that the majority of the Chinese Australians do not support AUKUS.
I'll introduce our next speaker, which is Alison, who's here representing Australians for War Powers Reform. You would think of any moment, at any moment, this is very, very important, this issue that is not just simply handed over to one person and possibly the deputy, Richard Miles, whether or not we join in a war on China. As we know, Labor was sort of like trying to walk two sides of the street, I think, before when it was first elected, and lead up to that, about whether I would support a proposal to allow Parliament to debate this proposition. It's a proposition that any modern democracy should have, and here to speak more about that, and probably other things is Alison.
Thank you, Pip. AUKUS was not mentioned as an election issue, this time or the last time, because the governments of the day don't ask for public opinion on foreign affairs and defence matters. Those things are not discussed. They may be debated occasionally in the Parliament, but there is no vote. And so they keep it to themselves. They discuss it among themselves in the National Security Committee of Cabinet, and the rest of us are left to guess what they've decided.
I think the likes of Scott Morrison and Richard Miles and those who thought AUKUS was this major genius stroke to finally embed Australia in permanently into the US military, it may be the moment where the Australian public wakes up and sees what a danger it is. And you see the polls. And AUKUS is about as popular as a fart in an elevator when you get out and talk with the public. Environmental catastrophe in South Australia. An algal bloom is destroying jobs, killing the environment. And yet, the Albanese government has found itself able to give 100 times more money to the US this year for nuclear submarines than they've been able to give to South Australia to deal with a genuine environmental crisis. They're the kinds of decisions AUKUS are forcing on us, and they're toxic as an algal bloom. But I want to point out this. War with China is not inevitable. We should fight against the manufactured idea that there's an invasion coming from China and that we would be in any way safer, even if there was, through the alliance with AUKUS, because indeed, all that AUKUS does is actually make war more likely. The idea that you arm for peace and you build $375 billion of weapons for peace is an obscenity, and we should push against it. The idea that there is some inevitable war conflict with China is an obscenity, and we should push against it, and we should reject it when we see it from our politicians and from our major media. And indeed, if you think about if there is a risk to us from a conflict with China, it only comes about because of AUKUS and because we are building a nuclear submarine attack base aimed at China off Fremantle. It comes about because we have Pine Gap and we have the Northwest Cape, and we have Marines pre-positioned in Darwin, and we have nuclear-capable B-52 bombers that are designed to be used in a war with China on our soil. So if we want to make Australia safe, let's knock off AUKUS and remove US bases from this country so that we're not a part of the war.
Thinking about the movement outside Parliament, we come up with some suggestions that we should think about doing. The biggest idea, the most dramatic thing we could think of to galvanise public opinion would be some kind of mass action at Pine Gap and Tindal, where the B-52s are based. That would be like getting people to do the caravans to those locations, which happened in the 1970s and 1980s, 1990s, I think, but not for some decades. So there are peace organisations in those areas which we could coordinate with. Another would be like a much bigger social media campaign. On the 15th of September 2021, Scott Morrison announced AUKUS. So the 15th of the month is a good day to remind whoever is the Prime Minister that we don't want it, that they should dump it.